Yeah, it's, yeah. The title's up. Go ahead.
The January meeting of the San Francisco Ethics Commission will now come to order. First thing, I would like to wish all of my fellow commissioners a Happy New Year. It's kind of the end of January, but it's still the beginning of the year, and we haven't seen each other for quite some time. So I hope you all had a great holiday, and it's good to see you again.
Very nice.
And a Happy New Year to all of you in the audience as well. We're glad you could join us today. Roll call. Commissioner Rennie.
Present.
Commissioner Andrews.
Here.
Commissioner Herr.
Here.
Commissioner Keene.
Here.
We're all here, and the meeting will now come to order. Is there any public comment on matters that we're going to be discussing or that or do not appear on the agenda at this time?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Dr. Derek Kerr, a whistleblower. Please note that Senate Bill 496 that took effect this month has expanded protections for whistleblowers. It prohibits anticipatory retaliation, whereby employers retaliate because they believe that an employee may disclose information to authorities. It reminds us that retaliation sometimes precedes the actual whistleblowing. The employee finds information, collects it, and then gets a layoff before they can file the complaint. I'd also like to acknowledge your unprecedented finding of a conflict of interest by a city official, even though she happens to be a good person. Previously, such complaints were routinely dismissed and complainants were thrown under the bus. It took you over 2 years to adjudicate our complaint involving former health director Dr. Mitch Katz. For 3 years, he collected over $10,000 annually from Health Management Associates, a for-profit corporation working for his department with his approval. You dismissed that complaint and our subsequent retaliation complaint. It took a lawsuit to get vindication and a $750,000 settlement, which cost the city an additional $450,000 in city attorney fees. Your inadequate investigation and habitual dismissal of whistleblower complaints is a type of official misconduct. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioners, my name is Francisco da Costa, and I have appeared before you before. And I too want to state to you very clearly that when a ballot measure was put to create this commission, San Franciscans, decent San Franciscans, and we are still here, wanted the right thing to be done. So, in the adjudication given to you, we, some of us whistleblowers, some of us advocates, some of us who have experience, I was trained by the Jesuits, worked for the Department of Defense, served 3 generals. So we know from experience the good, the bad, and the ugly. We saw this with the hearing, hours after hours linked to the sheriff, which in the end was adjudicated in his favor. But I am here to state to you categorically that there is rampant corruption in some city governments. Rampant corruption. Facts are given. That's called the empirical data. And you and others who can do the right thing, do the wrong thing. You and others, instead of looking at it and setting a standard, you let down the constituents of San Francisco. So today, you will hear about a case. It's a very clear-cut case. This case is so convoluted that some people are so arrogant, they are defying ethics, they are defying morals, they are defying standards. What they are saying is, we will be working until we get our benefits, until we get our pension. This type of arrogance is uncalled for. This type of arrogance, commissioners, is something that cries to heaven for justice. Thank you very much.
Any other comment from the audience?
Good afternoon, President Hayon, Commissioners. I'm Dr. Sandra Hernandez, and I'm currently the president of the California Healthcare Foundation, but served many years in the city and county of San Francisco in the Department of Public Health, culminating in its director, being director of public health. I left there and went to the San Francisco Foundation, where the foundation runs a program that's really focused on cultivating multicultural leadership for public service. You're going to hear a case this afternoon on item 3 about an employee of the PUC who I have known for more than 15 years, Ms. Ellis. She was a very successful candidate through the Multicultural Fellowship Program at the San Francisco Foundation, where I worked very closely with her. I watched her ascend in her work really on behalf of very disenfranchised communities, later running our community development program. She then left the foundation and went to work for a not-for-profit, where again she was quite successful in her leadership work. I've watched dispassionately and feel like the violations of ethics that were committed were ones that in fact were done not out of malice and really not fundamentally out of self-interest, but out of a fundamental passion and drive to serve a very underserved community. She's built an extraordinary nationally recognized community benefit program at PUC. And I think that the staff has done an extraordinary job of trying to be fair and assess this, and I simply come here in support of her and the recommendation of staff. This is a very talented, dedicated public servant who made a number of violations for which she has tried to remunerate to the best of her ability. And so I hope you take the recommendation of staff and understand that you do have, in fact, a very committed and very talented employee at PUC, and that she certainly will learn from these missteps. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon and Happy New Year. I was not going to speak. I was going to wait on your decision until she started talking about Juliet Ellis. You know, it's sad that we in Bayview Hunters Point, and that's what I represent, Bayview Hunters Point, and the problems that she have caused my community, and I'm talking about Juliet Ellis. In the 70s, we had the expansion of the sewage plant, and there was mitigation because of the expansion of the sewage plant, where we were able to get the city to build a community college. It is called Southeast Community College. Now, when this commission was set up because of the fact, my understanding was to take care of the pipes that's been broken, that's breaking, and the funds that we, the voters, voted for. The first time I went on the ballot, I told the director I was not going to support it because the city had been lying to my community. There's no sewage plant in any other community. The community benefits came from meetings that was held for 2 years. I was a part of that committee. Still, my community, and I'm talking about the people that live in Bayview, Hunters Point, where the sewage plants are, don't get any benefits. Maybe what she did before was fine and good, but since coming on board, because she was a commissioner, and I felt she shouldn't even became an assistant administrator. I felt there was a conflict of interest. But I supported it because of the fact she supported local hiring. I thought she was going to be a good individual for the community. But then it all started. She tried to take control, still trying to take control of the Southeast College, the areas that we came together and did a mitigation about. And I am tired. I'm 80 years of age, and I've been coming to these meetings at City Hall for over 50 years. And I will be going to the PUC Commission meeting tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. Well, I was not going to say a word because I just want to see where you all going to do your job that you are supposed to do. So I just came here to be, just to see what you were going to say about this case, and you have to deal with the case. Whether she committed or not, that is your responsibility, not mine, not any of us in the audience talking about how good someone is. If you did wrong, you pay the penalty. If it was me, I would have gone to jail. Thank you.
Any further comments from the public? If not, we'll proceed to our first item, which is, in fact, the Juliet, Ellis and San Francisco Public Utilities Commission case. Mr. St. Croix?
Okay. So you have the settlement agreement before you, the stipulation document. A couple of notes about this. This is a joint settlement with the FPPC, so there were 3 negotiating parties, the respondent and the 2 enforcement agencies. Because the FPPC has already heard and accepted the settlement agreement in a public session, we're in an unusual situation because our regulations require that these things be debated in closed session. However, since this document's already been debated publicly, the city attorney has advised us to do the same. So the staff and the city attorney will represent any questions you have about the document and the settlement and anything that's in this document. If we go off the document and into some details about the investigation, we may have to pull back from there. The bottom line in this settlement is that altogether there are several findings of violation of state and local law. For the purposes of simplification, the FPP is settled with the respondent for a $3,500 for a violation of Section 87-100 of the Government Code. The Ethics Commission has 4 counts of finding a violation in here. The first 2 counts reflect that self-same section of state code that's been adopted into local code. So for the purposes of the settlement, the state's portion of the settlement covers those 2. And then for the other 2 counts, counts 3 and 4, we've proposed and the respondent has accepted $2,500 each for those 2, for a total of $5,000 local, for a grand total of the settlement for $8,500 from the respondent. Additionally, the respondent has repaid, is the figure 17? Approximately $17,000 in salary that she received as the acting president of the Board of Directors of Green for All during the terms of the violations that we have incurred in this settlement agreement. So that, again, the staff and the city attorney can answer any questions you might have about this document.
Commissioners.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have a number of questions about this. First, in regard to the way in which this comes before this commission, each of us received a packet with the information relating to this complaint and the specifics of it, which I'm going to go into in a minute, that are in the complaint, and dated January 17th, 2014. And in the packet, it tells us, each of the commissioners, that in regard to these offenses that are stipulated to as having been committed by this lady who was a Public Utilities Commission official, that we would not be discussing it. We wouldn't discuss it. We wouldn't talk about it. Wouldn't do anything about it. It would just be considered adopted by us at this meeting tonight, unless one of us asked for it to be pulled to be calendared for discussion. I don't understand that procedure. Maybe someone can explain this to me. I see a series of allegations, rather serious allegations, against a high-level official in the Public Utilities Commission, saying that she violated several aspects of conflict of interest by working as a paid position at another job and lobbied the Public Utilities Commission to give contracts to that company she worked for, which would have amounted to about $200,000. She would have been a beneficiary of that. I will wind up agreeing with the stipulation. I have no problem with the stipulation. And I think, obviously, underlying it, our staff must have done a fine job of working on it with the FPPC in bringing about this stipulation. But why is it that something like this comes to us with the presumption that we don't talk about it, that there just be some vote on it without it being discussed, without our telling the public what we think about it? I think the education of the public on a matter of this significance, a high-level Public Utilities Commission official lobbying her own agency for $200,000 for a company that she works for, that's fairly significant in terms of conflict of interest. And we should not only be delving into it, as I'm sure we did, the staff must have to come up with this stipulation, but we should be talking about it, we should be discussing it more, we should be analyzing it, we should be telling the members of the public about it, educating the public about it. If nothing else, just to blow our own horn. I mean, we have people who are coming here and saying that the three meetings that I've been at, saying, you guys don't do your job. This is an indication to me that the staff did do their job in terms of the findings. The woman is admitting that she committed these offenses. She's going to have to pay a fine. You could argue about whether or not that's enough or not, but it's in effect a finding of guilt, a plea of guilty. All of that is fine. But can someone please explain to me why the procedure is it comes to us, and had I not asked that it been put on the calendar, we never would have talked about it. It just would have been considered that we accepted it, agreed to it. The public never would have known what our thoughts were about it. What is this procedure? Can someone tell me what this is all about?
Under the regulations of the Commission regarding the results of investigations, there are several types of documents: settlement agreements, proposals for dismissal of complaints, that the staff creates a document for and sends to the Commission. If the Commission agrees with those documents and does not calendar it, then the staff recommendations are adopted. Some of those documents are very, very simple. Some, like these, are more complex. So it's incumbent upon the commissioners to determine, not the staff, but the commissioners to determine which of these documents deserves discussion by the commission and which ones are simple and cut and dried enough to just accept the staff's recommendation. For most of the time that the commission had this procedure, it required 2 commissioners to calendar such a document. But a little over maybe a year and a half ago, the commission determined that that standard was too high of a too high for the commission to use, and it was lowered. Instead, a single commissioner can calendar any of these such documents.
And Commissioner Keene, let me just further that point. The change was made in response to the grand jury investigation, and we took many of those recommendations seriously, and I thought that was really a good one of theirs. And And the idea in reducing it was obviously to make it such that if any commissioner had a problem, it was going to be calendared, or any commissioner had a question. To Mr. St. Croix's point, we are also trying to balance efficiency with adjudicating matters with the group that we find to have significant complexity or for which there are lingering concerns. This would have been calendared even if you had not done it. You were not the only one to request this one to be calendared. And I think the Commission, by and large, does a good job of recognizing when a matter should be brought before the Commission. And as Mr. St. Croix said, the matter would otherwise have been heard in closed session, but for the fact that the FPPC had already issued a determination. So these are typically not, even when discussed among the commissioners, done so with the public present. Now, if we want to discuss a change to that procedure whereby they're automatically calendared and we discuss every one at every meeting, we can do that. But I think that decision is for a separate time. And I think today we should focus on adjudicating the actual matter.
Well, we will, Madam Chair. Well, we will indeed focus on adjudicating it, and in fact, as I said, I intend to vote for the stipulation. But I think that in regard to the procedures themselves, where we have a matter of such public significance that shows a conflict of interest to this extent, that it should be something that routinely this Commission will take up, that it will be calendared for discussion, that we do discuss it. We have the staff talk about it. We get into the background of the investigation. We have let the public know what it is that we have done in relation to a matter of significant public interest relating to a conflict of interest by a high official, benefiting by working for another company and voting and lobbying her department. I think we, at some point in the future, picking up on what Commissioner Herr said, we should change our procedures, and if something like this comes to us, we should just delve right into it, talk about it, analyze it with the members of the public, and in addition to that, get some sort of report from the staff about how this outcome came about. What were the negotiations? What were the investigation? Get some sort of background, the kind of thing that a judge would want in regard to seeing that there was a substantial basis for accepting a stipulation or accepting a resolution of a case. I just think to do it in this, to have a procedure whereby something like this can just not be discussed, and we've accepted it, the public never hears us talk about it, it's not a good idea, and it feeds into the stuff that I've been hearing now. I'm a new member. This is only my third meeting, and it's easy for me to say, I know, because I haven't been around like the rest of you have, and I mean no disrespect to anyone here in regard to the sincerity with which you all do your jobs. But here, if nothing else, the staff is hiding its light under a bushel basket. If it comes up with an outcome like this, which is a good outcome, shows they did their job, and we just peremptorily have it as a matter of procedure go through, we would say nothing, and it's passed. It sounds like a very foolish thing for me for us to do, at a minimum, from a public relations standpoint.
Commissioner Keen, I certainly don't disagree with your point of view on this. You may want to bring it up again at the end of the meeting in terms of items when we request items for future meetings, and it perhaps should be something that's calendared at a future meeting where we can discuss it further and then make a decision about whether or not we want to change the procedure, as Commissioner Herr indicated. So might make a note of that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioners.
I guess I have a slightly different view, or at least I'm not sure I quite understand Commissioner Keene's concerns, because this stipulation lays out the facts. It's a public document, and the public can read it, and all we're being asked is to say, we concur with the findings that are set forth here, and if there's a question about accepting the facts, as I understand it, that would have to be done under California law, under private hearing, not in a public hearing. This is so that the newspapers or anybody else can read this, and it lays out what she did and why it's a violation of the law. And we can discuss it and say we agree with it, but I guess I don't really understand how you feel that we are not making the public aware. It's been calendared as an item on the calendar, and any member of the public can read this document, and we've heard from 2 members of the public giving us differing views, apparently, on the seriousness of the conduct. But if we're going to challenge the staff, if we think the staff was wrong and that we need something else, as I understand it, that's got to be done in private initially, and then when we make our final conclusion, it becomes public.
Madam Chair, I have not challenged the staff. I'm complimenting the staff. And in regard to one thing I don't understand that Commissioner Rennie said is that if we wanted to discuss this and go into it, it would have to be done in private session. I'm looking here at the letter I got from Mr. St. Croix relating to this matter when I first got it. And in the final paragraph, he says, due to the FPPC's public deliberation and dissemination of the attached exhibit, the City Attorney's Office has advised staff that the Ethics Commission's deliberation of this matter should be conducted in open session, not in private. Right. You said it has to be done in a private session. That's not what Mr. St. Croix is saying here. That's not what the City Attorney is saying. We can do it in open session, and that's what we're doing now, because it was requested to be put on calendar. But
I'm sorry, can I just quickly interject? I think the discussion is getting too far afield from the agenda item. So I think for purposes of public notice, I think this is a discussion that if it's going to be had, should be had once this issue is agendized.
Right. But just one thing, if I may say this, my understanding is that what makes it possible for us to discuss this here today is that we do already have a stipulation where all parties have agreed to the facts as presented here. If that were not the case, then that would be a private closed hearing. Is that correct, Mr. St. Croix? No?
No,
if we were debating the merits of the case prior to a settlement or the stipulation, that would be a closed case, closed session, I mean?
Normally, a stipulation like this is in closed session. It becomes a public document when the commission has adopted it.
I see.
But because this particular settlement has been held in open session at the FPPC already, it makes it a unique case. So we're a little bit outside our normal procedure on
right.
this.
So it has to have been decided before we can make it public.
We don't bring stipulations to the commission unless the respondent has agreed to them prior to that.
Which has been done here. I'm sorry.
My other question is, now, I guess I don't understand the areas of jurisdiction between the state FPPC and then the San Francisco Ethics Commission. So this case was brought to both of us, and the FPPC has already decided and ruled on it, and now we're about to do that.
Right, and the FPPC's part of the settlement has to do with a violation of state law. Mm-hmm. Our part of the settlement has to do with violations of local law.
Commissioner Andrews, you had a comment.
Well, hearing from Commissioner Keene, I guess I was a little struck by when Mr. St. Croix said that we were going to find ourselves in a unique situation by discussing this publicly. I wasn't clear about that. It feels like we should have some amount of participation on the front end that doesn't have us here. And I don't know what that is, and I don't know at what point that happens, but because it was a public hearing at the FPPC, is that right?
Yes.
It was, so it just feels like we're being backed into the corner of having to have a discussion that is either nice to have but moot, late to the game, and I don't understand their full process themselves. So would they be having this discussion in public or in private? Their hearing, like we said that we would discuss this typically in closed session, and somehow they did. What if they discussed it in closed session?
They discussed it in public session.
They discussed it in public session. I guess I'm struggling with, the moment they do that, they immediately set some balls in motion for us that then, in some kind of way, have us talking about it tonight just like this, which makes it feel like, not necessarily that the staff didn't do their good work, because I know that they did, but it feels like the commission didn't get an opportunity to engage in some kind of way. And I don't know what that is. It just feels like there should be have been a front end that we would have been able to have the opportunity to discuss it in a closed session.
Well, we completed negotiations back in December, and just as an accident of calendaring, their January meeting was a few days before ours. Had their meeting been a few days later, we might be in a different situation.
That's the piece. That's the procedural or process piece that I'm a little tripped up in, which then.
But they're operating under a different set of requirements than we are, because we all have to follow state law, but we also have additional requirements that the San Francisco Charter places on us, and they're more restrictive than what the FPPC has.
Commissioner Keene?
Yeah. Could I ask, Madam Chair, perhaps the city attorney could explain it. This is before us right now for a vote, whether we will vote up or down the stipulation and join with the FPPC. Is that correct?
Right. The FPPC has approved their portion of the settlement. I think what's before us now is whether the commission wants to approve the violations of local law that were admitted to in the stipulation.
I plan on voting for it. What if we all turned it down tonight? What would happen then?
I can answer that.
Okay.
The FPPC would probably likely sever their part out, renegotiate that part with the respondent, and move on without us. And then we would have to renegotiate with the respondent for our own settlement. And then if the respondent will not come to terms with us, then we end up going to a hearing on the merits, which is a finding of probable cause and then a public hearing on the merits.
So, thank you. That's quite helpful. So, in regard to our deliberations of this matter, if we were to decide we've got to determine whether or not we're going to enter into this stipulation, in order to do that, we really have to get some more. We've got to get some information here for our hearing. Could we go into everything, or would? I mean, I think we can, in terms of what you're saying in your letter to us, January 17th, that the ball is now in our court to determine whether we're going to go along with it, and in making the determination whether we're going to go along with it, if we wanted to hear, well, let's get some of the background of this. Let's get some statements from the person who's charged. Let's get some statements from the officials of the PUC, what they think about it, whether they think this is okay, or how they look at it as one of their employees. Those are all things that I could see some of us may be saying, yeah, I'd really like to hear that. Could we do that now, this evening?
No, you'd have to do that, because the substance of the investigation and the workings of the investigation under our regulations remain confidential. even after a settlement agreement is agreed to and published to the public, the details of the investigation are required to be confidential by the San Francisco Charter to the maximum extent allowed by state law.
But aside from the negotiations, suppose we wanted to hear, we have subpoena power.
Mm-hmm.
Suppose we wanted to hear from the members of the PUC or other people who are involved with this action, and could we have subpoenaed them in here for tonight and taken their testimony?
Yeah, yes.
We could.
Well,
Okay, that's fine. That makes sense.
in a public hearing on the merits, yes. And I believe we could also ask them to testify in a closed session if you wanted to hear from them in that part of the investigation.
Or we could do it in an open session in front of the public.
No.
We could not.
No. No, not until we get to the point where there's a hearing on the merits. Then that's all public.
I'm sorry.
I think what I'm going to have to do is have a conversation with you after this meeting.
I understand.
Explaining this whole procedure.
I understand. I'm just having great difficulty trying to figure out. We're being told that we're supposed to deliberate about this stipulation, and I'm having great difficulty with the whole idea of deliberating if we can't get information relating to how we make up our minds in that deliberation. There's something Orwellian there that
well, this has never
maybe
happened.
It's just me.
This has never happened to us before. And in the 10 years I've been here, this is only the second time we've had a joint settlement with the FPPC. So this is not common occurrence. And in this particular case, again, this has never happened before, so we don't, it's not something we, anticipated and had a process in place to handle.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So, as to the merits of the stipulation itself and discussion of which way we might decide on this, Commissioners, do we have any comments on that?
I have
Points
several
of view?
questions.
Commissioner Herr.
My first question has to do with the status of the contract. On page 7 of Exhibit 1, it describes that in May 2013, Green for All returned all the payments. Are they, was that simply a voluntary returning of the funds? Has the contract been terminated? What is the status?
Yes, there's no contract between PUC and Green for All.
And so the PUC terminated the contract? Is that what happened?
I believe Green for All did.
Green for All terminated the contract?
I believe so.
And the PUC agreed to that termination?
Yes.
One thing that struck me in the penalty discussion was that there wasn't much discussion of factors A through C in Exhibit 1. And so I am curious as to what investigation we did and how the staff came out on the severity of the violation, the presence or absence of any intent to conceal or deceive, and whether the violation was deliberate, negligent, or inadvertent.
Well, with respect to the severity, it's addressed in the and I guess after where those factors are in the last sentence saying that it's one of the more serious violations of the San Francisco Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code. And then the...
Okay, but on that, if it's one of the most serious and we're proposing a penalty of a quarter of the maximum, why that number and what are the...
I think with respect to the penalty amount, I think that at least with respect to the first two counts, staff took into consideration the penalty that the respondent would pay the FPPC, so that, and also she had no prior history with the commission, and she had returned all of the money that she had received from Green for All during the time when these events occurred.
What is the most severe penalty that we've levied for something like this?
not able to find a similar case regarding these types of violations in the Commission's history.
And then what about the next two factors? Was there a presence or absence of an intent to conceal, deceive, or mislead?
I do not believe that there was any intention to conceal or deceive or mislead.
And I know, Mr. St. Croix, you mentioned at the outset that there could be questions that start to delve into portions that would not be public, and I want to be cognizant that I don't inadvertently step into that. But
We'll tell you if you do.
Okay. But I am curious as to the basis of that determination. What did she say that made it apparent that there was no intent to conceal? Because it is a little bit difficult to understand how someone like her doesn't understand what she's doing when she's accepting $17,000 from an entity that's engaging in a $200,000 contract with the PUC.
That's a very legitimate question to ask. So it's a combination of staff interviews with the respondent and superiors, and making a judgment call based on those. And it's also a determination that there isn't, and we don't have any way to believe that there's any credible evidence otherwise. And there's not, that we know of, anything we can do within our capabilities to delve into something like that and find evidence that there wasn't intent to deceive.
Well, but I guess you're making credibility determinations based on how she answers questions and what the evidence is before you. So I'm curious about what she said or what evidence she presented to you to indicate that this was somehow accidental or just negligent and not deliberate.
The basic presentation that she made was that she was just completely oblivious to the idea that this would present a conflict of interest, that more than one of her superiors were aware of these activities, and no one raised a red flag about them at any point, and therefore there was no indication to her from people that she believes should have known if there was a conflict, and since they did not indicate to her, she felt she was acting appropriately.
And what about that statement to the staff was believable? I mean, is that a typical occurrence that if the senior member doesn't raise an eyebrow, is that typically considered evidence that
it's not complete evidence. It's just a factor in trying to make a determination without solid factual evidence or any kind of investigatory evidence to the contrary. We have to make certain assumptions based on oral testimony.
Okay. By the way, is her testimony under oath to you?
No.
Commissioner Andrews.
Madam Chair, so also on page 7, and this was, we may or may not know this, it says that the respondent was a member of the Board of Directors of Green for All from 2009 to January of 2013. The respondent disclosed income from Green for All for work that she performed as the acting executive director from 2012 to 2013. So she was on the board all the way up until 2013, and between 2012 and 2013, it looks like she didn't step down from the board to become the acting executive director. Was she also then a voting member on the board of directors and an acting executive director?
I don't have the answer to that question. I am assuming that she remained as a member of the board. I never asked her the question of whether or not she voted on the board for Green for All during that time.
Because within that, just within that organizational structure, you could find yourself having a conflict of interest, undue influence on deciding, should you take the contract? Is it something that we should do? Is it something that we shouldn't do? It just generally is a practice, and different bylaws are written differently for nonprofits and corporations throughout. But as just a general good practice when you step down as, and often board members do step down as an acting executive director when there is the opening at the CEO ED level, but they usually recuse themselves from voting during that process to avoid any undue influence or conflict of interest. And I was just wondering.
And that may have happened.
I would assume for these purposes that she, as a member of the board, had the right to vote. And her membership on that board, in and of itself, was not a conflict with her position at the PUC. It was when scoping a contract that would eventually go to that board, that's where the primary conflict came in, exacerbated by the fact that when the director took maternity leave and she stepped in as acting director for a salary, that complicated and intensified the conflict. One of the indicators that I did leave out, back to your question, was she did report that income on her Form 700, which is a public document. So she wasn't trying to hide the fact that she was a paid member of the board of directors during the course of the events that are described in this document.
Madam Chair. A couple of things that are articulated in here that I had further questions on. So she takes the training, so she theoretically is aware of the fact that something like this is a pretty obvious conflict of interest. What is her explanation for still not realizing that it was a violation, and what was the explanation there so we can be comfortable that this was, in fact, not a deliberate attempt to violate the ordinance?
I think, as it was stated earlier, that she did not understand that this scenario was the same as what was described in the training. I don't believe that she understood the rule. I do not believe that.
Her anything further?
Those are my questions.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, are there comments from the audience?
Dr. Derek Kerr, a whistleblower. I'd like to appreciate Commissioner Keene's comments and insights. I think the problem is that government officials create these ethics commissions to serve government officials and also then the public. There's a built-in bias, and all of the confidentiality serves that bias, protects the officials. I was disheartened by the city attorney's effort to sort of sidetrack the discussion. This was a central core issue and directly derived from the case in question, so it was not off the agenda. I do disagree with Commissioner Keene in saying that this is an example of the case where the staff do their job. This is an unusual case where there was a smoking gun. It's a blatant example of a conflict of interest. Most complaints don't have the smoking gun. They'll have the bullet wounds, the powder burns, all kinds of other information. To get the smoking gun, you need to do an investigation, and this is what the Ethics Commission doesn't do. They're very superficial investigations. They bend over backwards to give the respondent the benefit of the doubt. They're swayed by empathy for public officials, and that's something that the rest of us don't get. But thank you for all participating in discussion. It's really very encouraging.
As I said before, this disturbs me very much. I'm the Director of Environmental Justice Advocacy. I have a good track record. I'm very well known. You commissioners superficially are trying to adjudicate something without delving into it, into this situation. We have organizations in San Francisco. We don't have to go to Green for All. If you probe a little deeper, the new director for Green for All that replaced Juliet Ellis, and his wife now works for Juliet Ellis. How did that happen? So, if you commissioners superficially assume that your staff did a wonderful job, I think you don't know the difference between reality and fluff. There's too much fluff. This woman today is arrogant. Tomorrow, she's going to help open up a new section at the Southeast Commission in the Bayview. She's going to be introducing the Board of Supervisors, Balia Cohen. She'll be doing the introduction. She has been saying openly they can't do anything about this. As I told you earlier in my comments, she's looking forward to her pension and her benefits. Is this the type of public official? She, by the way, is the Assistant General Manager of the SFPUC. She, by the way, was a commissioner. Is there precedence before that some SFPUC commissioner took such a position within the SFPUC? And I can go on and on and on with her job. Now, there are some people who think that if they visit the White House or they speak to Obama, or President Obama, sorry, that, it matters. It does not matter. I've spoken to the President. It does not matter. If you are a professional person, you got to have standards. This woman has no standards. And I see someone looking at me, but this woman has no standards. I was approached by a number of journalists who told me that the Ethics Commission would not give them the required documents. Thank you very much.
Further comments from the public? Commissioners, any further comments from you before we move toward making a decision on this? Commissioner Herr?
Can I just, for purposes of my own understanding, did the staff believe that that there was an absence of an intent to deceive here? Yes?
Yes.
And did the staff believe that this was inadvertent? I mean, specifically looking at C?
Yes.
Had the staff determined that it was deliberate, what do you think the range of penalty recommendation would have been?
Much higher. I don't know. I can't give you an amount.
Okay.
Mr. St. Croix, I had asked you this at one time, but if you could refresh my memory. Does this commission have the authority to recommend that a person be, in a case like this, be removed from their position? That's not one of our...
There's nothing spelled out in statute or charter that gives us the authority over that kind of thing for this level. Not being a elected official, board member, department head, it's beyond the scope of ours. Ultimately, if the commission determined that they wanted to communicate to superiors that, their deep concern about something like this and what a remedy they feel is more appropriate, you could probably do something like that as a separate action. But that would be outside of the scope of the settlement.
Okay, but if we were to do something like that, you're saying we could write a letter to the SFPUC or whatever the case would be, recommending that, or you're just saying doing something informally?
Yeah, I would assume, and I'm going to ask Josh to confirm this, if we were to take an action like that, we would probably have to re-agendize.
I agree with that. I think it's beyond the scope of what's agendized tonight. I think for tonight, the question is whether or not to approve the settlement. I think if there was something additional that you wanted to do beyond that, it would have to be...
But that action could be done.
It's not within, I mean, so basically the action that you're contemplating would be just some sort of communication by the commission to the PUC, sort of recommending some kind of employment decision to be made? I mean, it's not one of the penalties that's contemplated by the Political Reform Act, which is the state law here, or the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code. But I don't think that there's anything that's precluding the commission from simply just making that recommendation.
Yeah, I was asking it as a general question in terms of all of the work and all of the cases that are investigated. That's never come to our attention where, is that something that we should recommend or that we have the authority to actually do? Commissioner King.
Madam Chair, I would think that we as a commission would have the inherent right and power to publicize what we do, to write to other agencies, other governmental entities that might have an interest in what we do, tell them what we have found, and tell them what has occurred as a result of our actions. And I think in that situation, if I were on the receiving end of that, that would be enough. I don't think we have to go any further than that.
And we actually have been faced with a situation like that, although not an actual employee, but a fellow commissioner on another commission where we have recommended that some action be taken, but we don't have the power to enforce that in any event.
Maybe I can ask the city attorney this question. If we were to find, I'm hypothetical not with this, but egregious conflict of interest by a city official, don't we have the power to determine whether it's official misconduct justifying termination?
I would have to check the specific language of the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code. I'm happy to do that and provide you with an answer after this meeting.
Madam Chair, so we were just wondering what is this not the maximum penalty administrative fee here, which I see on page 8 and page 9? If you added those up, it was $5,000 for count 1 and $5,000 per violation, which comes to a total of $20,000. Is that right? $20,000 was the max?
Correct.
You were when you referenced earlier that you said it would be much larger than that. This is the $20,000 that is the max.
Right. Because the proposed penalty is not the maximum.
No, I understand.
In addition to the fact that the $17,000 has been returned. Commissioners, do we have a motion?
I'm troubled by this case, I must say. If the settlement were for something that was north of half the max at least, I think I might be more comfortable. But I mean, I'm not convinced there wasn't deliberate misconduct here, frankly. And so while I think the staff did a very good job of negotiating the settlement and getting a resolution, and while I in general favor resolution because I think it is efficient and clearly here this person is recognizing that there was a problem and cooperated fully with the staff and deserves a lot of credit for that. I guess I'm just, having read this, having a hard time with the conclusion that it was negligent.
Commissioner King?
I don't have any problem voting for this, mainly because what this shows on the face of it is this woman is admitting to all sorts of derelictions of duty and, in effect, corrupt actions. And these are what the findings are. For example, counts 1 and 2. Influencing a government decision in which the official has a financial interest. That's not jaywalking or spitting on the sidewalk. That is a fairly serious finding of guilt in regard to official misconduct. The second, count 3, contracts, sales, and purchases made in official capacity. That, again, is someone who, a member of an agency who is saying that she did that. She's admitting to something, to use Commissioner Rennie's term, rather egregious, in my opinion. And count 4, she's admitting that she did engage in incompatible activities, incompatible with her job. After this stipulation is, in effect, voted on by us and the FPPC, it is a finding of guilt, in my opinion, that disgraces this woman and puts her in a position where any further employment, we're not recommending it, but just speaking hypothetically in terms of anyone who's working for the, who's in charge of the for the PUC, to continue employing someone like this, I think would be very strange, if nothing else. And so here, I'm not troubled by the penalty, as is my colleague, Commissioner Herr. I mean, the fine, the $5,000, to me, that's negligible compared with the findings of guilt, official misconduct, and disgrace. We're saying you did a lot of bad things here, ma'am. And I don't know how we've had some of the members of the public saying she says she's going to just tap dance away from this and nothing's going to come as a result of it. There's no way, after we make findings like this, in conjunction with the FPPC, that a governmental agency is just going to say, well, we hear you had a problem, but it's over. Go back to work. And by the way, you're due for a raise. That's not going to happen. And if that does happen, I think I'd be the first one to complain about it. So in that regard, here I see we as an agency, our staff has done a good job. And in terms of I would defer to their findings relating to things like credibility, whether or not they saw intent and deliberation and stuff like that. They were there. They interviewed the witnesses. They interviewed her. I didn't. None of us did. I think we should defer to them on those matters unless it's clearly erroneous what they're doing. And I don't think it is. And we should go ahead. The FPPC, which is an agency that has considerable repute and clout, they're saying they find the same thing. We're joining together in an alliance with a sister agency and saying this bad stuff was done. I think that's not a bad night's work for us.
Do I hear a motion?
Move that we adopt the finding.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
I oppose.
I oppose.
Are three, I am
votes
in
are
favor.
sufficient.
We have, the motion passes. We approve the stipulation and the decision along with the FPPC.
And we will communicate this action appropriately.
Okay, so now we come to the budget, always a favorite topic of the commission. Mr. St. Croix, where are we with the budget?
Okay.
Have a blessed evening.
You too.
So for years, particularly because the city financially was doing poorly, as was the state and the country, the directions from the mayor's budget office has always been all departments to find a certain percentage of cuts in their budget proposals. The Ethics Commission is a little bit unique in that we're an independent agency from the rest of the city. We don't quite function in the same structure. So though we are politely acknowledge the mayor's budget instructions, we usually have declined to follow them and then just submit a static budget of the same budget we had the prior year. Last year, the commission decided that things had improved sufficiently enough that we should ask for a little bit more because we'd had vacant positions that were vacant for a while. So we did ask for a modest increase. That's what the commission adopted. Following that line for this year, we did get a mild increase from the mayor's office and back from the Board of Supervisors, which did increase our budget. We have filled the empty educator position and the empty auditor position. We have funds this year for an investigator, but those increases that we got last year are only for this year. They don't translate on to next year. So what I'm proposing is that we request a budget that actually keeps those increases in place, that will allow us to fill that one remaining staff position at that level. And then I'm also proposing a very modest $22,500, which reflects the increase in our net file contract. And in this year, of course, the first time it's increased since we've had it. So basically, acknowledging the fact that there's still some budgetary consideration that the city faces in terms of shortfalls. We're not asking for the moon and stars, but we are asking for something to more or less keep us whole. We're almost whole, and so just kind of getting us to where we want to be.
Commissioners, any other ideas, any comments?
Let me say one other thing, if you don't mind, because we do have new commissioners that weren't here for last year's budget cycle. There's two components to our budget. The election campaign fund, which is the money we use to give public financing to candidates, that's an independent fund that we manage. And by statute, every year, there's a certain percentage deposited into that fund based on the city's population. So it's about $1.9 million every year automatically goes into that fund. It's capped at $7.5 million. So if it reaches that point, then the deposits into that fund will stop temporarily. And then the rest of the money is, again, that's the operating budget. Administrative. The overwhelming majority of our administrative budget is for salary and fringe. All of our other costs are pretty minor compared to those two big ones.
Commissioner Keene.
Madam Chair, I wonder if the Commission would just indulge me for a little bit with Mr. St. Croix as a new member to educate me a little bit as to the history of the funding, which is on the second page, because I'm not familiar with the specifics of it, and it seems rather fascinating in terms of the large increases in funding that occurred from fiscal year 94, 95, 157,000, and then 05, 06, it's 1,382,000. Then it jumps to 8 million, and then it goes down to 3, and then could you? What's going on here?
For the purposes of what you're looking at, prior to 06, 07, we didn't have an election campaign fund. There wasn't a separate one. So the board and the mayor had to do an annual appropriation for the public financing program back to 02 when it was first initiated. So that wasn't included in our budget. It was just a separate line item in the budget. When that fiscal year 06, 07 kicked in, the board created mayoral public financing. We'd only had it for supervisors before. So part of that creation was to put a big boost into that, create that election campaign fund and put some money into it. So when you follow those numbers down the column, when you get to 06, 07, if you shift to the number in parentheses, that's the logical follow of the column above in terms of what our operating budget is, our administrative budget. So those big jumps in that first column, there was a lot of money in the fund, and then at some point the Newsom administration borrowed some of it, and so there wasn't as much, and then over time they paid it back, and then a second time money was borrowed from it, and then that was slowly paid back. The fund was originally capped at $13 million, and then the board decided, well, we've never used that much, we don't need that much, we shouldn't sequester that much when there's so many other needs. So that's why these numbers have jumped around so much in the past several years. Most of it are big fluctuations in that campaign finance fund.
How does the mayor's office get to borrow money from our budget? I did the budget for the San Francisco Public Defender's Office for 20 years, and by God, we never let the mayor's office take a nickel from us.
Well, because the election campaign fund is a weird thing, and budget numbers are kind of fungible, and the public defender's office is headed by an elected official who's elected in his own right, who doesn't report to the mayor. Neither do we. That's kind of why we don't necessarily follow the instructions. But
But he can come to us and say, hey, I need a loan, guys?
Well, we don't really have any authority to say yes or no, because the mayor and the board control all those purse strings. So if the mayor's office decides and the board concurs, that's basically what happens.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chair, a couple things. Just as a note, I'm not sure when the memo was drafted and when your executive director's report was drafted, but I just wanted to have some consistency on the letterhead of the commissioners, particularly the memorandum on January 22nd, 2014. We still have old commissioners. It's just not updated. So I just wanted to make sure if all of the office is using it,
Yeah.
that they're using the same one.
I beg your pardon. Thank you for pointing that out. What I did was I pulled last year's memo, and I used that as a template, so they didn't have to retype all of these numbers.
Yeah, figured as much.
And that's what I did wrong, and I apologize for that.
And then,
Let me underscore that you are indeed a commissioner.
Thank you. That's helpful. At least on one sheet, I'm a commissioner, so.
I beg your pardon. I will fix that.
And then the election fund, in the middle of this memo, you have the election fund at 1.903559, and then in the narrative, it's 1.906395. Are those the two same funds that you're talking about, or they have two different numbers, but is it the same exact fund?
Yeah, and I'll apologize for that, too. Our budget person, after I drafted this, gave me new figures, and I believe that the 1903 is actually the correct one at this point.
Okay. And then just my last would be a comment on the state of the city, which I'm generally going to be in supportive of this modest increase. I've been a part of the city budget process for 11 years, and we've seen the mayor's budget instructions be in double-digit numbers and the contingencies being. So, I mean, just the 1.4 and the 1.85 for the second year of our two-year budget is great. I mean, I think it's very good. It goes to show that the economy of the city is good. It'd be interesting to see the mid-year controller's report, Harvey Rose's report. I think our revenues are strong. I'm always nervous when we ask for an increase that it doesn't fly in the face of what could often be a stark reality of an economic crisis, and you look like a fool. And I don't want us to look like a fool. And I think what we're asking for is modest, and it's certainly justified. So I would be supportive.
I just have a question on the mathematics. You say what the mayor's asking us to do is to cut 1.4 in the general fund for the next year and then 1.85. And you say this would mean a cut of $36,752. Then you get down to the paragraph where you say in the current fiscal year, it says, further, the requested cuts would cut our customary annual budget for temporary staff of $100,000 by 2/3. Mm-hmm. Why does it, when you're only being asked to reduce it by $36,000, how does it cut the $100,000 by 2/3?
Because the assumption was that that's where most of these cuts would come from. And I think what the budget staffer did was to add those two figures together and figure out that's where they would go.
Over a 2-year period?
Yeah.
Do we use 100,000 of temporary?
We will this year. We didn't we used most of it, I think, last year. The year before, we were kind of husbanding it against later in the year. And we got that was a year that we had to do mid-year cuts.
What's the nature of the temporary staff? I mean, what is it across the board on different functions?
We usually have someone during parts of the year where it's very busy, like election season, try to get an extra person at the front desk, or in the case of now, we have a special project that we're doing because we're moving almost everything we're doing to all electronic filing. So we have someone working on converting those systems to all electronic and working on the training and the outreach that we need to do to let people know how to do this and make sure that they're up to speed on these processes, because electronic filing is something campaigns are used to, but city employees and officials haven't used electronic filing systems as much, and so we have to make sure, because we're going kind of cold turkey, we're not easing into it. This year everything goes electronic. Someone's working on that. But every now and then we also just get somebody for maybe 6 to 8 weeks or a couple of months to help out. Sometimes we have backlogs of very basic clerical work, like scanning documents and that sort of thing, that somebody that would make just a few dollars an hour could handle, and then frees up the regular staff to do other things. But that's what we use the money for.
Thank you.
I have a question about going to all electronic filing. Will that eventually reduce our staff, the need for the amount of staff that we have?
It might in the long term, because once people are able to do all of those things without a lot of staff assistance, we may not need as many people. Though, as time goes by, we've also learned that either through acts of the board or ballot measure things, we get additional responsibilities. Sometimes state law, we have to function to fill those in. So as there are additional laws and requirements in our bailiwick, sometimes these things expand as well. So there's going to be some back and forth in the balance of how many people we need. Having said that, they may need less clerical help, but hopefully that will mean we could get more auditing help. For example, one of our long-term goals should be to audit every single campaign rather than just the public finance and a sampling of others. So there are other things we could be doing right now that we don't do as much of, and in those terms, and maybe we even want to be able to expand our investigation capability. So there's things we want to do that we can't now, that might free people up to do eventually.
Very good. So do we need to approve this?
Yes, please.
So do I hear a motion? Any further discussion
What do we
before
have
I hear
to-
a motion? Oh, I'm sorry, public comment on the budget? None heard.
I move that
will
we adopt
entertain.
the budget.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Minutes from the last meeting? Do we remember the last meeting?
I wasn't there.
Commissioners, any corrections or changes on the minutes?
I have none.
Do I hear a motion to, is there any public comment on the minutes? If not, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion, the minutes are approved unanimously. Executive Director's report?
Okay, just two things I want to mention. The first is, I've mentioned once or twice that we have a new auditor, and she's here with us tonight. Manisha Lal is our newest staff member, and so she decided she would like to come by and see the commission in action, so we welcome her.
Nice to meet
Welcome
you.
aboard.
And then the only other thing I want to highlight is, and this is back to sort of budget discussion, if you look at our revenue report, which is item 4, it's low, and we've done some projections, and we expect this year that we're only going to pull in about 75% of our anticipated revenue. The lobbyist filing deadline for the year is at the end of this week, and there will be a lot of last-minute filers. We actually expect to pull in more lobbyist fees than we anticipated. The number of campaign consultant fees is down. A lot of those folks will not re-register until they start working on the campaigns in the fall. But that will be after the start of the fiscal year, so there will be lower numbers there than we expected. The campaign finance fines, we have found our way down, which is a reduction in revenue, but ultimately is good news because it means there's just less violations occurring. So ultimately, I think that's a good thing. The other thing is, that's indicative of this, is just about since we've been here, we've had a backlog in assessing fines and waivers and everything else. We're completely caught up for the first time since I've been here. So we don't have backlog fines from prior years coming in anymore. So that's a great thing, yeah.
Mr. St. Croix, so you're, of the $100,000 projection, you say would probably capture about three-quarters of that and would be down about 37,000?
We're projecting 73 and change.
And that 73 and change is, of the 100,000, that was to balance your budget, right? Was to balance your department budget?
Well, we're not a revenue department, so the anticipated revenue doesn't impact our budget, like, I'm forgetting the words, departments that are revenue enterprise departments, which are revenue producers. We're not an so that doesn't impact our budget. And just as a point of information, too, when we do our budget revenue projections for next year, we will probably turn them down to that 70, 75 range.
Question on looking at the status of accounts, delinquent revenue. What's the reason why those aren't being paid? Do you have an enforcement provision?
Yeah. Under city law, once a revenue due to us is more than 90 days old, we're required to refer it to the Bureau of Delinquent Revenue, which is part of the Treasurer's Office, and they pursue these in court. What I will do is, I know that, for example, Chris Jackson was making payments for a while and then stopped. And then, so that was referred over to those folks. I'm not sure about the status of the other one, but what I can do is have the staff get an update report from BDR.
Because I see one is April 2011.
Yeah. Part of a lot of times when the city gets judgments against people for money they owe, they still can't collect them. And so there's a problem. You need certain details, personal details, to garnish someone's wages, and people do not have to voluntarily give those. So the BDR can get a judgment in court, but it often can't enforce them.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Public comment.
Public comment on the Executive Director's report? Hearing none. We move on to items for future meetings, which we touched upon earlier in the meeting. Commissioner Keene, do you want to
Yes.
propose something?
What I'd like to do, if I want to give a little thought, Madam Chair, maybe put something in writing and transmit it to Mr. St. Croix. Would that be the way to do it? And then it could be calendared for our next meeting. There are a couple of procedural changes that I would like to suggest, but I don't want to just come out with something off the top of my head.
Any other commissioners' thoughts for items for future meetings? Okay. Any public comment on items that we've discussed or that are not on the agenda? Hearing none, I think we can move to adjournment. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The January meeting of the San Francisco Ethics Commission is hereby adjourned. Good night.